You know that feeling when you notice something on your body that wasn't there before? Maybe a small bump, a tiny lump, something that feels different under your fingertips. Most of us do the same thing. We ignore it. We tell ourselves it's probably nothing. We convince ourselves that if it was serious, it would hurt. It would grow. It would demand our attention in some dramatic way. But here's what nobody tells you about the things that change your life forever. They rarely announce themselves. They whisper. And most of us aren't listening. For nearly 3 years, I had a small lump on the side of my neck. It was barely noticeable at first. No bigger than a pea. I remember the exact moment I discovered it. I was shaving one morning, rushing through my routine like I always did, and my fingers grazed something that felt out of place. I paused. I pressed on it. It didn't hurt. It moved slightly under my skin. And just like that, I made a decision that would haunt me for years. I decided it was nothing. The thing about denial is that it doesn't require effort. In fact, it's the path of least resistance. Going to a doctor meant taking time off work. It meant sitting in waiting rooms. It meant facing the possibility that something might actually be wrong. And who wants to deal with that when you can simply look in the mirror, tell yourself everything is fine, and move on with your day? Months passed. The lump stayed the same. I took this as confirmation that my instincts were right. If it were dangerous, wouldn't it be growing? Wouldn't I feel sick? I had energy. I felt healthy. I was living my life normally. The lump became background noise, something I occasionally noticed in the shower, but quickly dismissed. My wife mentioned it once, asked if I had gotten it checked. I brushed her off. I told her she worried too much. The first year came and went, then the second. By the third year, I had almost forgotten it existed. It had become part of me, as unremarkable as a freckle or a scar. But bodies have a way of forcing us to pay attention when we've ignored them long enough. The change happened gradually, so slowly that I almost missed it. The lump began to grow. Not dramatically, not overnight, but enough that I could no longer pretend it wasn't happening. I started wearing shirts with higher collars. I angled my face differently in photos. I was adapting to this thing rather than confronting it. Looking back, I realize how absurd that was. How we humans can convince ourselves of anything if we're scared enough of the alternative. But fear doesn't make problems disappear. It just gives them more time to evolve into something far worse than they needed to be. The morning everything changed started like any other. I woke up, reached for my phone, and felt an unfamiliar tightness in my throat. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. The lump had doubled in size seemingly overnight. My reflection stared back at me, and for the first time in 3 years, I couldn't look away. The drive to the emergency room felt surreal. Every red light seemed to last forever. Every passing car contained people living normal lives, unaware that mine was potentially unraveling. My wife sat beside me, her hand gripping mine, neither of us speaking. What was there to say? 3 years of silence had said enough. The hospital was crowded that morning. I sat in the waiting area surrounded by coughing children and exhausted parents, feeling strangely calm. The panic had subsided, replaced by something heavier. Resignation, perhaps. Or maybe just the exhaustion that comes from finally stopping the act you've been performing for years. When they called my name, I walked toward the examination room knowing that whatever came next, I deserved it. The doctor was younger than I expected. She examined my neck with practiced fingers, her expression carefully neutral. But I've learned to read faces in moments of crisis, and I caught the slight tightening around her eyes, the pause that lasted half a second too long. She ordered an ultrasound immediately, then blood work, then a biopsy. Each test felt like another step down a staircase I couldn't see the bottom of. 3 days later, I sat in an oncologist's office. The word alone terrified me. Oncologist, a doctor who specializes in cancer. My wife held my hand as the doctor explained what they had found. Thyroid cancer. The lump I had dismissed as nothing had been something all along. It had been growing silently, spreading quietly, while I convinced myself that ignorance was the same as safety. Here's what I wish someone had told me years ago. Pain is not the only indicator of danger. Some of the most serious conditions announce themselves through symptoms we've been trained to dismiss. A persistent lump, unexplained fatigue, minor changes that seem too small to matter. We wait for the dramatic symptoms, the ones we see in movies, while the real threats operate in silence. The months that followed were the hardest of my life. Surgery came first, removing my thyroid gland entirely. Then radioactive iodine treatment, which left me isolated and exhausted. Then the endless follow-up appointments, the blood tests, the scans that made my heart race every single time. I had caught the cancer, yes, but later than I should have. It had spread to several lymph nodes. What could have been a straightforward treatment became a prolonged battle. But this story isn't about seeking sympathy. It's about breaking through the wall of denial that so many of us build around ourselves. I survived. I am one of the lucky ones. My cancer responded to treatment, and today I live with careful monitoring rather than active disease. But I carry the weight of those wasted years. The knowledge that earlier action could have meant easier treatment, fewer complications, less fear. Every day I meet people who remind me of my former self. They mention small lumps they've been ignoring, strange symptoms they've been dismissing. They laugh nervously and say they're sure it's nothing. And I want to grab them by the shoulders and tell them what I learned the hard way. Your body speaks to you constantly. The question is whether you're brave enough to listen.